Greetings. Hello. Welcome to PCAP's Native Prairie Speaker Series. My name is Caitlin Marone-Seiler, and I am the Stewardship Coordinator with Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan, or PCAP. Today, in celebration of our 25th Native Prairie Appreciation Week, we are hosting a special webinar about a topic that we don't usually cover. We'll have two panelists today. First, Karin Steuber will be speaking about More Than Stones and Bones, Archaeology in Saskatchewan, and followed by Andrew Miller, who will be speaking about post-treaty for land use by Touchwood Agency Tribal Council First Nations from 1874 to 1980. Before we get going, I'd like to state that we respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations and communities, past and present. For millennia, they have worked to protect these landscapes and the life these areas sustain. I'd like to thank these original caretakers and acknowledge the ongoing work and presence of Indigenous peoples in Canada today. Just a few items before we get going. I'd like to note that PCAP's Native Prairie Speaker Series is a monthly presentation about anything to do with Native Prairie or species at risk. We'll be taking a break in July, but I'd like to invite everyone to join us for a webinar about migratory birds by Jordan Roostad of Last Mountain Lake Bird Observatory on August 31st at 12 p.m. And as always, you can register for our webinars through the website. If you miss one of our webinars, you can check out our YouTube channel, and this one here will be recorded and uploaded there in the near future. A reminder to all of our listeners out there, as we have over 150 registrants, you'll be muted for the duration of the webinar. But if you have any questions during the presentation, just type it into the Q&A section of the webinar dashboard at any time during the presentation. And feel free to upvote other people's questions if you have the same one. Special today, we'll have two Q&A sessions, one for each panelist. I'd like to take a moment to note that financial support for today's webinar is provided by our presenting sponsors, Canadian Forage and Grasslands Association, North American Helium, Nutrien, Saskatchewan Cattlemen's Association, and SaskTel. Now, a bit about today's first presenter. Dr. Karin Steuber is the Public Outreach Coordinator for the Saskatchewan Archaeological Society and an adjunct professor with the Department of Archaeology and Anthropology at the University of Saskatchewan. And she's been an archaeologist for over 20 years, working across the Canadian plans with a focus on lithic technologies. So with that, I will pass it over to Karin.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screens. Did it work, Caitlin?
Yes, it just needs to launch to the full screen mode. There.
How's that?
Perfect.
Awesome. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Caitlin and PCAP, for inviting me to speak. Sticking to about 25 minutes might be a little hard, so feel free to mute me when I start to run too long. As Caitlin mentioned, I'm with the Saskatchewan Archaeological Society. I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement as well, that I am located on the traditional territory of the Nehihaw, Naka, Nias Tipi, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and Dene peoples, as well as the homeland of the Métis. However, the Saskatchewan Archaeological Society serves all nations in Treaties 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 10. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the types of archaeological materials that we can find in the province, as well as what do we do once we actually encounter them. So we have over 10,000 years of human history in the province. It dates back to the tail end of the last ice age, where we had Indigenous groups on the lands hunting the last of those ice age creatures like mammoths, very ancestral forms of bison with things like spear points, and all the way through time up until present day and the more recent historical past that involves settlement era in the province. So some of the common Saskatchewan archaeological artifacts that I'm sure many people are familiar with, especially for all of you that are out there farming, are things made out of rock. Rock is very durable, right? It lasts forever. However, some rock can be broken in particular ways in order to make tools from it. So we have the ever-present larger stones that you can hopefully see with my pointer here. We call these hammerstones or grooved mauls. You find a lot of them all over the province. People in the past would have ground out the groove around them. These could be attached to handles. They could be used as axes, as hammers. They could be used to weigh down teepee coverings, right? But because they are larger, often metamorphic rock, people aren't going to carry them with them. So they will leave them behind, often cache them, and they could come back to them in a year's time. So they're there if you need it. Not as easily transportable, but they are widely available throughout the province. Everyone is probably aware of things like arrowheads, right? We call the entire series projectile points. So this ranges from the spear points used at the tail end of the Ice Age to hunt that larger game, all the way through to atlatl or spear thrower dart points. And then finally, around 2000 years ago, people adapted to a bow and arrow technology. So you see a decrease in the size of these projectile points through time. So from bigger spears to smaller arrows. There were also other tools made out of stone, knives, scraping instruments for hide cleaning. The other most common archaeological materials found, bones, right? Bones from the processing of animals. So we have an idea of what people were eating in the past, whether it's bones from bison, which is very, very common in archaeological sites. But we also have other forms. We have antelope, rabbits, birds, fish, deer, anything of that kind, right? They're all tend to be present in archaeological sites. Now, these bones may exhibit changes to them, breakage patterns that indicate that people were cracking them open to get to the marrow inside, or just dismembering the joints of that particular animal. But they could also be used to form tools. So everything from bone handles to other things like bone fleshers, again, used when it comes to cleaning hides. We also have an example here of a bone needle that has come out of a historic site. Little bit more rare, for lack of a better term, but they do exist. So we see a variety of bone tools as well as just animal bones indicating that what people were eating. Pottery is another common artifact. This dates to about 2000 years ago, same time that bow and arrow technology first appears. We don't find entire vessels that would make our jobs easy, right? But often the broken, discarded sherds from these pots that archaeologists spend a lot of time refitting together. So here's some examples on the screen of some of the different pottery vessels that we find in the province, as well as some of the sherds. Some around the edges or the rims will display decoration on that, and that could be indicative of specific groups of people. So we know people who we call that were part of the Mortlach culture would often put tiny little holes along the rims of their pottery vessels that we call punctates, right? You'll also see different methods of how the pot was formed, whether it was formed through coiling a bunch of clay together upwards into a pot, or maybe it was pinched, right, and hand formed around it. You will also see impressions from fabric from grasses and stuff that's been left on the pot. So that all gives clues to the groups of people that were making these pots, the areas in which they were living, what kind of local clays were available, the different tools they would have used to form the decorations on the pot. Now, as we get closer to the fur trade and colonization period in the province, we see an influx of different types of artifacts being found in archaeological sites. So a lot more things coming out of Eastern Canada and the US, as well as from overseas. So the presence of glass, which we hadn't seen prior to contact and colonization, glass bottles, glass window panes, things like that. A lot more metal in the form of metal tools, metal tin cans, buckles, buttons. We also have different pieces of ceramics. So instead of pottery, we see this transfer into European ceramic patterns that start to show up in fur trade archaeological sites. And they're really, really neat because they come in a wide variety of patterns that we can identify. And with an identified pattern, you can usually tie it to a specific time period. So you know when that site might have been occupied. In cases where we do get good preservation, more organic materials such as leather can be preserved. So we have some leather on this belt in the picture here, as well as shoe soles. Um, we've been excavating with the University of Saskatchewan up at Fort Carlton for the past few years, and the amount of organic preservation at that site is absolutely incredible, so that we're getting a lot of leather that's actually coming out intact, and that's going to help inform us about who was living there and get a better overall idea of the daily life of fur traders and Indigenous groups that we encountered at the site. Another unique thing, wood tends to preserve more in these more recent historic sites. So wood beams, wood handles, you can get an idea of the types of structures that were present, and glass in the form of beads. So a lot of the beads that we see in fur trade era sites are actually coming from the Czech Republic or Venice, Italy, and they come in a variety of colors and sizes and styles, which makes archaeology very interesting to do here. So some of the less common artifacts, they do exist. They tend to be a bit more rare just because they could be highly curated. It could also be because of their age, they don't last, as well as preservation. So again, those organic materials, things like birch bark baskets, unless you have a really great area where you get a high degree of preservation, that organic material will break down through time, and maybe not enough of it is left over to be able to tell what the artifact was. Prior to the creation of pottery and the usage of it in the pre-colonial time period, groups probably would have been making storage containers out of woven grass bags and things like that. So we know they were storing items, we know that they were cooking items, but those materials that the artifacts were made out of just unfortunately degraded through time. When it comes to projectile points, some of the really, really early varieties, such as Clovis, they do exist. We've never found a site in Saskatchewan with an intact Clovis component. That doesn't mean that it isn't out there. It just means that it hasn't been found yet. Since Clovis was 10,000 plus years ago, these Clovis sites could have eroded away, been destroyed. They could have been deeply, deeply buried under thousands of years of deposition. You know, they are out there. We do find them in personal collections. Many local community museums have them, but we have yet to find a site with it intact. Another interesting artifact are atlatl or spear thrower weights. So these were carved pieces of stone that would have been used as part of the spear thrower. These were often curated. So people carved them, they had meaning, they had significance. They were taken along with them. This is not something that you're gonna like quickly make, use, and then discard. So because of that, there's going to be less of them in the archaeological record. So I'm sure many of you have artifact collections, have found collections of artifacts, maybe you've inherited them. Everybody wants to know, what do I have, right? How do I know how old something is? That's where the society can really help out with that. We have a number of resources that can help you kind of figure out what type of projectile point you have. We've recently released a new book called Points of View, a guide on Saskatchewan projectile points with Indigenous perspective. people want to know what they have and how old it is, right? We understand that, but we wanted to incorporate some Indigenous perspectives in it since it is their ancestors that we are predominantly studying. So this book is a guidebook. It will tell you, okay, this is the shape of this type of point. This is commonly where it's found, and this is the rough age that it dates to. And that's great when you have projectile points, but what if you don't have projectile points? How do you know how old an artifact is? It can be a little bit more difficult. When it comes to figuring out the ages of those types of materials, excavations are usually the best way to do it. And these are often done by professional archaeologists. We can use different dating techniques, such as radiocarbon dating, where we can date organic materials like bone that's found in conjunction with some of these other tools. So that helps to put an age on a site. But something like those grooved mauls or hammerstones, they were used throughout the past, right? They were curated, they were cached in the same place. So there's nothing to say that some of those objects could have been used 500 years ago or 5,000 years ago, right? And the same object might have been used through time because people are coming back. They are living in the province. They are traveling through the province. They're going to find this object and they're going to reuse it again. So it's harder to put a date on those type of artifacts when we do find them. Some other resources that are available, is it archaeological or is it geological? Many fossils and rock specimens may look like they would have been used by people in the past. We have a retired mining geologist, Frank McDougall, who's put together 2 guides available on our website that you can kind of use that as a preliminary means of figuring out, is this just a geological specimen or is this something that has been manipulated by human hands? So archaeology happens in Saskatchewan every day. Sites are found by professional archaeologists. It's their job to go out and look for those sites, but by regular people as well. So much, I would say the majority of what we know about Saskatchewan archaeology is the result of farming, right? Especially in the 1900s, right? All through the Depression era, when a lot of topsoil was eroded, farmers are out, suddenly all these artifacts are lying on the surface of fields. So people amass large collections from this. This gives us an indication that people were there in the past, just as they were in the 30s and 40s, right? Because it's a nice place to live. Hopefully you can grow crops if the weather and the environment cooperates. So people would gravitate to ecologically diverse and good areas to live all throughout time. So early archaeology in the province was a lot of collecting. People have passed down these collections to their descendants, their grandchildren, and a lot of people still have them today, right? So we have those amateur archaeologists, those collectors, as well as the professional community. Now, the province does have a Heritage Property Act that protects sites as a non-renewable resource. Once an archaeological site is dug up, it's destroyed, right? So for this reason, it is a scientific process. It is regulated by the government that when you are attempting to do any kind of archaeological excavation, you should do it in a scientific and methodical way. And that involves paperwork as well as having a good methodology of how you're going to go about excavating this archaeological site. And this is predominantly done by professional archaeologists. Now, when it comes to developments, this is also regulated through the Heritage Property Act. So oil and gas projects, subdivisions, roads, gravel pits, all those kind of things, the government usually screens to see if the area that's being impacted, if it has any kind of archaeological potential to it, because we don't want to inadvertently destroy archaeological sites if we don't have to. So there's some processes out there. The Heritage Conservation Branch in the Ministry of Parks, Culture and Sport has kind of a flow chart you see here for how to determine if any kind of development may be impacting archaeology. And it's basically, if you're a large company and you want to put in a potash mine, you need to do some heritage screening. If you're just a normal farmer and you want to put in a dugout, you can still check if the area has heritage potential, but they're not going to stop you from doing it. The government acts as the regulator, right? They keep a database of all the archaeological sites that have ever been recorded in the province. We can see by this map here, it's a bit harder to see on the screen, but there's a whole bunch of red dots, right? And there might be some yellow dots mixed in there as well. These are all the known and recorded archaeological sites. River corridors makes sense. You may see some lines or some clusters. This is often pipelines, potash mines, uranium mines, things like that, where they definitely would have had to do archaeological screening, and they found a whole bunch of sites. So the government, part of its job is not only to regulate if these sites are being impacted, but to keep an inventory of what's out there. And that's where it becomes of use to researchers in other institutions like the university, the museum, as well as with the Saskatchewan Archaeological Society. So if you're interested in doing archaeology, if you're interested in going out there, maybe you have teepee rings on your property, or maybe a medicine wheel or an effigy, or you know there's an area, maybe there's a blowout and a bunch of artifacts are coming to the surface, we encourage people to take out what's called an avocational archaeology permit. And it's basically just saying, I'm going to go collect these artifacts, or I want to record this teepee ring, and it's located in this particular area. Again, it helps to put the dot on the map, right? The ministry would actually love it if more people took out these permits, right? Just so they can have an idea of what's out there. And it's, again, it has that research value to it. So you have an artifact collection. What do you do with these things, right? Pictures are great. A lot of people, they have them in ice cream pails, old 5-gallon pails. They're not even sure entirely what they have. We recommend putting together a catalog, just a listing. What do you have, whether it's on the computer through Excel or Microsoft Access, which can get as complex as you want it to get, right, in terms of the type of information you're inputting, or even just a list on a piece of paper, what you have, what you think you have. And archaeologists in the society can definitely help with constructing those catalogs and telling you what you have. Where do you go from there? Once you have a catalog, do you want to keep these artifacts? Well, we recommend when people come to us with collections or artifacts, we ask, can we fill out something called a Saskatchewan Archaeological Resource Record? It's a form. We help people fill it out. It's basically, what do you have? Where did you find it? Is it in any danger of being damaged or destroyed, whether it's a site or an artifact? It's so they can put the dot on the map. And so that if a student is researching a particular site type, like a teepee ring or a bison jump, or maybe they're looking at Cody complex projectile points, the information is accessible to them. And maybe they want to come talk to you about your collection and find out more, right? There is a rumor out there, I've heard it for many, many years, that if I tell any archaeologist, whether they work for the government or not, that I have artifacts or I have a site, they're gonna come and take my artifacts away, or they're not gonna let me do anything with my land. It's entirely untrue. We just want to know what's out there so we can get a better idea of what happened in the past, how we can as an act of reconciliation, help modern First Nations peoples and Métis peoples learn more about their ancestors. Right? Nobody wants to take it away. We don't want to store it in boxes in a museum. If you have a collection and you don't want to be a steward of it and take care of it anymore, or you have no one to pass it down to, can help you find a home with that. But the number one thing that we really strive to do with people is to try to get that resource record filled out, just so we know roughly where things are being found. So I've put the information on the slide here, the heritage conservation brands in the Ministry of Parks, Culture and Sport that are the regulators that are the keeper of these records. Now, I've also added the Royal Saskatchewan Museum on here because it is the provincial repository of all artifacts, right? It will also work in curating those collections or repatriating them. So you have a collection, what do you do with it? Storage, number one. We want to make sure nothing gets damaged. It's free from disintegration. If you want to display artifacts, go for it. We've seen many collectors who put them in picture frames, they mount them so that they can share the beauty of these objects with people. We're talking more and more about repatriation, keeping the artifacts in a community. If we work with local community museums or we work with a local Indigenous community, to consult with them. What do they want to see with these artifacts? Do they want to have them displayed somewhere for future generations? Or they can be accession or basically given to the Royal Saskatchewan Museum, which is that provincial repository. So there are a number of steps that people can take, a number of options that they have. The society is here to help people figure out what's the best fit for them and the artifacts or the sites that they find. So I'm always happy to talk more with people about that in the future. So if you have more questions, we can go into more details about it at a later date. And so just to finish off my presentation, I'm going to mention a little bit about the society. We were founded in 1963 predominantly by collectors. Our mission is to connect Saskatchewan's past to you. And we're all about education and helping with the stewardship of archaeological artifacts and sites. So we have a number of different programs and services. We do run public field schools. We put out a quarterly newsletter. We have conference on a yearly basis that travels around the province. So we may be in a community near you or have recently been there. We have educational resources, not only for teachers, but for people as well. Like I mentioned, those guides. And we go out and we do outreach. We do activities with kids, as well as public presentations. You may be interested in our identification and consulting services, such things as sites and artifacts. I love getting emails to see people's collections because I'm learning more every day looking at the types of artifacts that are out there. I will never get sick of looking at people's arrowhead or projectile point collections. I can guarantee you that. We have those educational resources and activity kits. We also publish a number of books. We have a game, a map. I really recommend that new publication that that I had listed on a previous slide, Points of View. It's Saskatchewan focused. Both Alberta and Manitoba have their own projectile point guides. For years, the Alberta guide was our best seller in our bookstore, but now we have our own. So it's Saskatchewan focused and Saskatchewan proud. So this is some of the things that members of the society get to do: visit archaeological sites, excavate at archaeological sites throughout the province, as well as coming into our office in Saskatoon if you're in this area and working on collections with us, identifying them, cleaning them, and cataloging them. And just before I finish, because I know I'm going to be running out of time soon, a couple of upcoming opportunities. If you're interested, we are going to be out at the original Humboldt site this coming weekend, the 24th and the 25th. If you've never tried archaeological excavation and you want to, contact the Humboldt Museum because we will teach you everything you need to know. If you want to know more about making traditional pottery or your own stone tools, we have a number of upcoming workshops as well. So, how to contact us, myself in particular, or our general email address, the website as well. Definitely, if you have questions, let us know, and we'd be happy to help work with you on the immensely amazing archaeology that we have in this province and just the ingenuity of people through time. So thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you for the awesome presentation. To our attendees, if you have any questions, just type it into the Q&A section. Right now, we have 2 questions. The first one is, do you track artifacts if they are sold, given away, or donated?
If they are donated to like a museum or something like that, or you let us know that you are giving this collection to someone else, that's always helpful information. Artifacts that are sold, it is against the law to trade and sell artifacts. We don't want it leaving the province. It is property of the Crown, but it's really property of all the people of Saskatchewan. And most provinces have this law. I know in the United States, basically what you have is yours to do with what you please. But in Canada, we have provincial laws that say you shouldn't buy or sell artifacts because it removes it from its context, its historical context, and it's basically it's just an object, right? It loses all meaning to it. So, and we can't track the buying and selling of that, unfortunately.
Okay, no problem. Is there a concern that amateur archaeologists may be taking ownership of Indigenous cultural items? Do you get involved in returning them to Indigenous people?
Our society does not. We try to facilitate conversations and dialogues between Indigenous groups and whoever has an artifact collection. We encourage people to work together, right? Because if I find a projectile point as a settler, I don't own it, right? I am a steward of it. I am a caretaker through time. So if an Indigenous group is interested in having that repatriated to them, I definitely want to work with them to that, to help that happen. And we're seeing that more and more, that, you know, it comes down to a matter of capacity for Indigenous communities. Like, do they want things back, first of all? Not all of them do. Not all of them have storage spaces for it, but they would like to have access to that material for ceremonial, usually, reasons.
Okay, that makes sense. And a listener named Doug is wondering if you have any word on the suspected Clovis site near Rocanville.
Rocanville. Okay, I think Tom Richards, which is the executive director of the Heritage Conservation Branch, I think he was looking into that. So I would recommend contacting the Heritage Conservation Branch and asking if he's got any further information on that. I unfortunately do not, but now I'm interested too.
Yeah, it does sound really neat. We were just talking about Clovis points before our before the webinar started. So somebody else is wondering, is there a process to recover articles sold to other museums out of province, such as sacred objects belonging to families in Saskatchewan?
That's a really great question. I'm sure that the Heritage Conservation Branch probably does. The Royal Saskatchewan Museum does have a repatriation policy, so all I can do is suggest contacting both of those organizations. They're the ones that have like the legal means and the oomph of the law behind them to be able to have those items repatriated two communities.
Okay, that makes sense. I think that's all the questions that we have right now. Yeah, it looks like it. So I just want to thank you again for the awesome presentation, and you're welcome to stay on for the next panelists, and there might be a few more questions at the end as well for you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
So our next presenter is Dr. Andrew Miller, who has worked with the Plains Cree, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Dene, Raramuri communities of Canada and northern Mexico, documenting traditional land use and knowledge since 1996. The present work arises from work with Touchwood Agency Tribal Council elders, with whom he has worked with since 2017. He holds a PhD in Natural Resource and Environmental Management from the University of Manitoba and a Master's of Science in Forestry Science from Northern Arizona University and a BA in Geography from the University of Texas at Austin. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, Andy. You can take it away.
There we go. Now you can hear me. And the presentation, am I showing
Yes.
you?
Yeah.
I'm not showing you my notes. Great.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. It's a pleasure and a privilege. I've worked for First Nations University of Canada for going on a decade. It'll be 10 years this July. And I've only been in Saskatchewan for about 10 years. Prior to that, I guess I am a settler. I should mention that my ancestry in North America dates back only as far as the 1600s. And in that time, the relationships that my people have had with Indigenous communities has probably been a bit good, a bit bad. But the efficiency of government, religion, and capitalism has meant that where my communities have come into contact with Indigenous communities, there's been a largely one-sided kind of relationship, or the flow of benefits have really been towards sort of the European settler society. And as a newcomer to this territory, I come with that awareness that the people who are originally from here, it's not simply stories of the past that that we're responsible for, but there is an ongoing present where our capacity to share and care for one another is at stake. So without too much more to say about that is my land acknowledgement that I realize I'm a newcomer and a guest in traditional territory of Saskatchewan. When I wrote this title with the ambitions of telling you about the research that I've been doing for the last 7 years with Touchwood Agency Tribal Council elders, I like to think of this as sort of an aspirational title. I'm not sure I'm really going to hit it full square, but it's been a fantastic experience to work with the elders from these 4 communities. Let me see. Here are a number of them. Elders whose knowledge and wisdom I'm going to attempt to share with you today about the relationships that they've had with they and their people have had with the region today known as Saskatchewan, Treaty 4, since time immemorial. To tell you a little bit more about these communities, Touchwood Agency Tribal Council consists of 4 communities: Daystar First Nation, George Gordon's First Nation, Kawakatu's First Nation, and Muskowgan First Nation. They are a Plains Cree, Nehiyawak or Nehiyapuat communities. There's Soto. There's also representation of Métis, both both Franco-Métis and Scotch-Métis families within these communities. Each of these communities has their own history, their own very distinct stories of travel that have, travel and travails across Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta, into the United States. But since they elected to settle together in the treaty period in a place known as the Touchwood Hills, they have come to know themselves, refer to themselves as Posaganachiwayeniwak. That is the people of the Touchwood Hills. And my work with them began with the question, when I first met elders there, and we began to discuss what trouble we might get into together. I asked them the question, like, what are the places and stories that your young people should know in order to connect to Indigenous culture and history? Are there places that are outside of your reserves that people should know about? And what I come to understand is that being able to locate history is a really important part of understanding that there's no story, there's no history that doesn't occur someplace. And by reconnecting a place to the events that are meaningful, we really begin to form a more concrete idea. Concrete's a bad word for it, but a better idea of where we fit in the flow of history, in the ongoing story of our times. And the point that I'll return to again is that these histories are not finished with us. Some of these events that I'm going to talk about occurred over 100 years ago. But we can see their echoes today in the things that we experience, in the decisions that are being made today. And for the First Nations, these are very relevant, ongoing questions about connecting to place, connecting to culture, language, and the treaty promises. So, before I go too much further afield, I want to talk about that name, that Posaganachiwayeniwak, the people of the Touchwood Hills. Just an example of what I mean by the importance of places. The Touchwood Hills is the place where touchwood can be found. Posaganachi, Posaganachi is that place, but Posagan is this fungus you see growing on a poplar here. It is the Latin name, as far as I can understand, is Enotus obliquus, or chaga. Many people today know this as chaga, a medicinal plant. You put it together with the achi suffix, which indicates place of or land. So together, Posaganachi is the place where this poplar fungus grows. There's a number of significances for this fungus. Why know this place by the name of a fungus? Well, it's not only a potent medicinal plant, but this is also a slow match, that you can strike a spark to this fungus and carry it with you to your next camp. That'll make your life quite a bit easier in the days before phosphorus matches or flint and steel. So just in underscoring this name, what I mean to indicate is that all of these places, these Indigenous named places, have lessons for us in linguistics. They have lessons for us in Indigenous lifeways and Indigenous values. You know, this place where people came to live, the 4 communities, was worth knowing by its name as an indicator of something that was important to them. All right. My work with the elders ultimately has, you know, in the last few years has sort of, one of its focuses has been trying to understand seasonal movement. We understand that the peoples of this region for the last several hundred years at least were largely they migrated seasonally between resource, seasonally of abundant resources, that, you know, the same fish or the same waterfowl or the bison or medicinal plants were not permanent fixtures on the landscape, that there would be periods, moments in the year when they were at peak abundance or their benefits were at the highest point. And so people would arrange to be at those places to take advantage of what was going to keep them alive and well. And so, you know, if we take the seasonal round of where people were, what people were doing, we can understand the spring. This is the beginning of the year. The arrival of grass and green growing plants is the beginning of the new year. And the activities of that period are spawning jackfish and suckers coming out of the deep lakes into shallow streams where they'll drop their eggs. There's migrating waterfowl that's arriving to the sloughs, wetlands, and waterways. There's duck hunting. And there's also a sort of a seasonal sort of set of ceremonies, that this was the period when the shaking tent was sort of conducted as sort of a means to attune themselves with the spiritual guidance that they could receive about where they needed to be in the landscape in order to anticipate what's coming. They need to, you know, make use of the coming resources and prepare themselves for the full cycle of the year by gathering certain medicines. This was the period of time when they did that in the spring. During the summer, this was a period for medicine picking. Saskatoons could be in late June, choke cherries, July, August, deer and elk hunting in Last Mountain. And to, you know, to some of the important places could be, you know, those with exposed campsites, so that mosquitoes were not, you know, voraciously picking them apart. But come August, there would be molting ducks, and there are specific camps, specific places that people identified across the landscape that were good for you know, all of these things. In the fall, there'd be the harvest of nuts, pecan, the name for, you know, that shelled nut relative of a walnut. Pecan is an Algonquin word for nut. There'd be hunting of migratory waterfowl, and the fall big game hunt. And at this time there'd be a second shaking tent, and people would ask, well, where do we need to be in order to shelter from the winter winds and to take advantage of the winter wildlife? During winter, the activities would have been focused around trapping, ice fishing, and, you know, people may have decided to travel as far as the Cypress Hills, where there's abundant firewood, protection from the wind. You know, one of the key drivers for winter camps is access to flowing water. that you need to be near permanent springs that don't freeze deeply. The story of the peoples of Saskatchewan through the late 19th century, where let me back up a little bit more. I see, our what we call history begins in 1691 rather, when Henry Kelsey, a young fur trader for Hudson Bay Company, descends the Nelson River, takes a right turn at the Paw, and heads to the North Saskatchewan River. He is traveling in the company of Assiniboine people who've traveled to the bay to trade their furs, and he is traveling the country. He writes an absolutely god-awful poetry piece of work about traveling into Saskatchewan and seeing the herds of animals. We think, and we're not entirely sure, but the best interpretations of the landscape that he describes places him somewhere close to the Touchwood Hills in 1691-92. And the thing that he notes, some of the things that he's credited for as being the first white man to see the great herds of buffalo in Saskatchewan. And this is really, sort of, he's also the first to see the Great Plains, as near we know. And this sort of enters us into the next, or sort of a long chapter in European and Indigenous relations is going to be focused on wildlife. That his journey into North America is to find furs, but for until the close of the 19th century, buffalo are also going to be central to European experiences of the central part of North America, and the collision and the competition for wildlife is really going to shape Indigenous and settler society. Buffalo, of course, is central to Indigenous life and livelihood. Buffalo structures the movement of people. It shapes the way that societies work, that men, women, children, old people all have recognized jobs to do in relation to the pursuit of buffalo, the processing of that meat and those hides, the creation of tools, the passing on of ceremonies. All of these things are really what give shape to the lives of Indigenous people of the prairies. Today it's quite hard to reckon, that this animal was the smell, the smells, the sounds, the presence of this animal could be just so inescapable, virtually inescapable in this region. One of my I guess one of the accomplishments of the last few years here at First Nations University is to have a class in which I take students up to George Gordon's First Nation or down to Standing Buffalo, Dakota Nation, and Harvest Buffalo with the assistance of community. And you can see some of my students here getting their scrape on, enjoying that sort of historic cultural contact. But here's a statement from a guy by the name of Isaac Cowie, who was a fur trade he was in charge of the Last Mountain House fur trading post just on the southeast side of Last Mountain Lake. And he writes in 1868, "We followed the trail leading to the Touchwood Hills for about half a day and then headed northwesterly towards the north end of Last Mountain Lake, round which we went and then fell in with buffalo innumerable. They blackened the whole country, the compact, moving masses covering it so that not a glimpse of green grass could be seen. Our route took us into the midst of the herd, which opened in front and closed behind the train of carts like water round a ship, but always leaving an open space about the width of the range of an Indian gun in our front, rear, and flanks. The earth trembled day and night as they moved in billow-like battalions over the undulations of the plain. Every drop of water on our way was foul and yellow with their wallowings and excretions. So we traveled among the multitudes for several days, save when we shot a fat cow for food or a bull made a charge and perhaps upset a cart before he was shot down, neither molesting nor molested." He's speaking of a moment in time, right? As late as the 1860s, herds could be traveled through for days. This is a statement of what the landscape is like, and how the feeling of that landscape must have been utterly different than the one we have today. The noise, the sight, the smell of buffalo must have been just inescapable. For the next few decades, and for the decades prior to this, the trade in buffalo has supplanted the trade in beaver. What we see in these images are the location of the Touchwood Hills post. This was post number 1. It was established in 1848 and was in use until 1861. So, the Last Mountain House, that if you drive up Route 20, on the east side of Last Mountain Lake, there's a little national monument there for Last Mountain House. And that fort was occupied for a scant 2 years. Here is a location that was occupied for 13. And it is a farmer's field. It is a field. But you can still see the tracks of the Carleton Trail that connected Fort Garry in Winnipeg, or outside of Winnipeg, and Fort Edmonton over in Alberta. And you can see us, we're in the company of Lisa Hines, an archaeologist who worked for Red Eagle Tail Archaeology. We're taking a stroll through the site to see if there's what is there. That we found foundations of places, and this is again a location and a set of events that are sort of central to First Nations experience for the last 100 years, for better than the last 100 years. The Kwakatus First Nations people know themselves as the Meskanawiniwak, the road people. That is, it refers to their camp beside the Carleton Trail and beside Touchwood Hills post number 1. And there are stories of the things that they did there and why they camped there, and what they experienced there. This is a page. This is a statement of returns at the Touchwood Hills post, January 17th, 1856. And I've transcribed it on the right. That 1,247 buffalo robes, 254 whole skins, 166 half skins were taken in this one winter shipment. We have 500 buffalo tongues. We have 6,500 pounds of buffalo fat hard, 400 pounds of buffalo fat soft, 6,000 pounds of dry meat. I mean, it sort of, it boggles the mind, the notion that there's this kind of wildlife abundance in this region. This is 1856. The fort had already been established by that point for 8 years and was going to run for another 5 before it moved locations to Mission Lake on George Gordon's First Nation, and then again moved to the corner of Muskowgan First Nation, where the monument now sits. It was open there until 1907. By that time, the buffalo are long since gone. The last recorded buffalo hunt where Touchwood peoples participated was 1881. And this really begins a real shift in the way that First Nations people experienced their country and related to the settler society. That, what we can see in this instance is, a strong economic relationship whereby First Nations people are taking the wildlife, the products of the country, and bringing them for exchange for guns, for blankets, for clothing, for cloth, and other goods. But this changes, this is an economic partnership. And what we see now with the loss of the means to partner, is, well, what are you gonna do for us now? How are you going to function now? So what follows this, the extirpation of the buffalo, is the treaty era. In 1874, First Nations in Treaty 4 signed in Fort Qu'Appelle in September 15th. And shortly thereafter begins a very radically different, transformative sort of relationship with newcomers, whereby, the promises in that treaty are interpreted in a way to consign young people to a mandatory re-education program in residential schools. My first day of working with Touchwood people, with the table of advisory elders that were assembled for my work was, are they, I asked very naively, are there places that are important to your communities for hunting and gathering medicines, or because of the history they contain? And Elder Irvin Buffalo says, what you need to understand is that our people, even most of our elders, were made to attend residential schools. I feel sorry for our children and our grandchildren because most of them don't know what was taken from us. These places were what was taken from us. He then, like, he's delivering to me an explanation of where their relationship to land went. And then he proceeded to absolutely blow me away with stories. One of the stories that I'm about to share with you is the absolutely next story that he tells. But what we hear here is this is sort of we don't know very much. Our people don't know very much anymore. Our relationship with land has really been impacted. As I know you're all aware, but it bears repeating, the Indian residential schools were a cultural genocide. They accomplished to a very large degree what they set out to in breaking the relationship of Indigenous people to their land by attacking the connection between young people and old people and their shared relationship with land. I'm going to step forward a little bit and tell you a little bit about what we found. Okay. Over the, that conversation I had with Irvin was in 2017. We then went on, over the next 2 years to describe over 60 locations that are named in either Cree or in Soto, hunting areas, trapping areas, fishing for both summer and winter, medicine picking areas, story locations. That is, this is the hill from which Man Who Runs and Long Hair, they escaped the Blackfoot by running over the top of this hill. This is the lake where the white horse came out of the water, and we met the horse for the first time. There are ceremony sites, there are grave sites, cabins, and known archaeological sites. All of these things. Oh my goodness, did I really talk for 20 minutes already? Holy mackerel. I'm just burning through time. And these are the locations all across the province where elders shared their stories. I want to tell you a little bit about this place. It's in English. The English translation of the Cree is many chokecherry bushes. In English, we know it as the Mount Hope pasture, but the true name in Plains Cree is Katkweminnanatkakosskak, many chokecherry bushes. And here's a close-up of what that satellite image looks like. The Daystar and Kwakatu's First Nation are on your right. This place became a community pasture in the 1930s and was fenced in the 1960s. But historically, this was a place where people would go to take the molting waterfowl, to hunt deer, to gather chokecherries, and to bring in medicine. Elder Bill, you can see at the top, he says it was during the time of the Hudson Bay Company was on Kwakatus. That began around 1848, 49. They didn't have wagons, but they used horses to haul the things behind. They always went there. The people from Yellow Quill and Fishing Lake would come over and stay with their relatives in Kwakatus for the rain dances. That would be August, and they would stay to either go hunting at chokecherry places or to visit Little Manitou Lake and then go back home. And he describes the signals that it was time to go. Or Elder Tom Favel from Kwakatus says this. He says, it looked like it had little spears. The grass that Bill is holding, it looked like it had little spears. They grow and you'd pull them. When them things start growing, that was the signal that the ducks were molting and they were losing their feathers and it was time to go. That's when people would pack up their teams and pack up their stuff and go west. That was our hunting area as Native people. When the ducks were molting, people went out. They used to walk on the lake because it was quite a big lake, but it was shallow. They'd walk with sticks, and the ducks would just charge out into the water. The water was foamy and they're running out and they're chasing them out, and they'd just catch them and hit them with a stick. They're called paskosibak, ducks that molted. What we're seeing here is an environmental signal that the elder is indicating that this is what you watch for to know that something else is happening, that the ducks are molting, the chokecherries are ready. So, we can see that this sort of beautiful awareness of the procedure, the annual procedure of the development of plants and animals. Here's Elder Mike McNabb from George Gordon's. He says, we'd take the dogs and the dogs would pick them up. We'd just ride on horseback into the slough, and the mallards are the ones that would run out. Them teal ducks, they're the ones that would stay, and just take the dogs around, and he'd sniff out the ducks and catch them. So, here's the multi-species awareness. The teals stick tight into the reeds, and the mallards will run into the bush, and your dogs or your kids can run and whop a bunch of ducks. There would be 5 or more families. You know what? I'm behind in my time, so I'm gonna walk forward a bit, I'm afraid. What this all sort of means to convey is that this is a collaborative duck harvest at the time of their peak population. This is likely a sustainable use of the resource. It's not sport. This is providing the provisions for the fall and winter. from a seasonally super abundant, super easy to collect. No, super easy. I wouldn't want to chase a duck. Easier to collect time. And people shared. This was a collaborative effort. And here, Bill talks about the last time he goes to Touchwood, or to the many chokecherry bushes. He says, the last time I went there, it was already fenced. And I was with John Skiboss, his uncle. We were hunting there, and a guy intercepted us, and he says, "You guys can't come in here. This paddle's for pasture. This cattle's for pasture. This pasture's for cattle." My uncle John said, "Well, whose land is this?" He was pretty mad, old John. John said, "You're trespassing on this land. This is our land." And that guy didn't know what to say. So here in the 1970s, we have this settler view of what land is for and who has access to it, and we have the First Nations view. This is an ongoing conflict. It's not over. This is not the end. It didn't end in some moment in the last century. That the promise to share crown lands is not being kept. Full stop. And we can see our province selling, privatizing long-term access to land. The point I would close with is that every First Nation has a cultural landscape, and it is invisible to those who don't know the stories, who are uninitiated. And they're deep stories. They're stories that potentially go hundreds of years deep, in contrast to less than 150 years for settler stories in Saskatchewan. And they connect us not just to places, but they connect us to stories, to meanings, to relationships, with country, to spirits, to things that we should be doing and thinking about. And I would leave us with a question that reconciliation is a very nice idea. What it really involves is land, is relationship to land, because we are, settler society has managed to acquire rights to profit, and we need to really be much more willing to share these rights, and rights to determine management. So cultural landscapes not only identify economic possibilities, they identify management possibilities. And alternate futures. These are sites where reconnection is often desired by First Nations, and they are locations of unfinished business. And with that, I would just say Che Miigwech, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. I know that 20 minutes went by really fast.
How did that happen?
I
Who
don't
took
know.
those minutes? Where did they go?
Well, I just want to thank you for the awesome presentation. It was really, really informative and really thought-provoking. So thank you for that. To our attendees, if you have any questions, just type it into the Q&A section on the dashboard. And it could be either for Dr. Miller or Dr. Steuber, whichever. I'll direct them appropriately. So we'll just give everyone a few minutes here. And just while everyone's taking a minute to type in their questions, I just want to remind everyone that it's Native Prairie Appreciation Week going on. So feel free to check out the PCAP YouTube channel. We have in our social media, we have a photo contest and all sorts of neat things happening this week. We'll be visiting different farmers markets across the province and giving away free wildflower seeds. Yeah. Okay, we've got one question here. And I think this is for you, Dr. Miller. You touched on prairie sloughs related to ducks. I was wondering, how many stories are there about sloughs that you've heard from elders?
Well, it sloughs. It was one of the questions that I asked. You know, like what are how do you refer to different kinds of water bodies? The sad thing is that a lot of well, I don't know. I've not heard that name yet. I've not heard that name of what is a slough. But that's a good question that I want to follow up more. I know they're important for a lot of livelihood activities. You know, as I alluded to, they're big places for collecting waterfowl eggs that elders talk about, for collecting waterfowl, for collecting medicine. Cattails are a good food source. People shared stories about wildlife that is not thriving. American bitterns are a wetland species. Frogs, American coots are not thriving species, and they're often associated with sloughs. So, you know, there's a lot of information. There's a lot of things. Sometimes the stories are about specific locations. So the answer is yes, there are lots of stories about sloughs.
That's great. It doesn't look like we have any more questions right now, but
I see one here.
it's a comment.
I see.
So Lynn says, I just wanted to say that this was extremely interesting and informative. I will definitely be telling my family and friends to watch and listen to this when it's posted on YouTube. So thank you both very much. Yeah, and then there's one question that just came in, if it's published. Oh, it looks like you're holding up the book. So that looks like a great resource for people to check out.
It's a small book, but it's one of the products of the research. It's about 40 or so different places around Touchwood. Actually going from Cypress Hills all the way up to Hudson Bay, Saskatchewan. And they're the stories of four First Nations out of the 74 First Nations in Saskatchewan have the history of using that region. They have commitments, spiritual and relational commitments to a very large region.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Well, I know we're already over time, so I think we'll end it there. It doesn't look like there's any more questions coming in. So I just want to thank you both so much for the really interesting presentation. And there's been a few comments coming in from listeners, and people have sent me a few chat messages as well to say thank you and that they really enjoyed both of your presentations. So thank you both.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Perfect. And for all of our attendees out there, I'll just remind you to check out our YouTube channel later. And then when you leave today's webinar, there'll be a quick 1-minute survey that'll pop up. If you don't mind filling that out, that helps us keep our Native Prairie Speaker Series going to the future. So with that, thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye now.